All the ignorance that I felt from people towards us pushed me closer towards my identity and drove me to learn more about my history. October the 7th wasn't an intelligence failure. It was a failure of imagination. Even after Hitler was voted in, it was a minority of people who wanted to see the Jews dealt with in a certain way. And the majority didn't take a minute to step back and think, where's this going? I like to look at the left as thinking with their heart and the right as thinking with their head. But you can't do both on a small scale and you can't do both on a large scale. All you need to show me is a photo of a dead child in Syria, caption it Gaza, show me and just say, how could you not support my cause? Kids my age, a lot of them just hate their life. They don't resonate with someone who's disproportionately successful because it makes them feel worse about themselves. Even before speaking a word of Hebrew, I came here and I felt like I was surrounded by family.
Welcome to the show. We're here with Sammy, Samuel, Sam. It's less preferable.
One of the three,
I guess take
Shmuel, maybe.
We're neutral. Let's go with Shmuel.
Shmuel Yahood.
Who's been making some very interesting content, standing up for himself as a Jew in England, and just giving strength to the Jewish people and getting some backlash for it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey there and how you found yourself doing this and standing up for yourself and where that courage came from?
Yeah, thank you guys. Well, I'm Samuel, born and raised in London, England, to a very Jewish upbringing, very traditional, not super religious, but surrounded by the Jewish community until I was 15, 16, till I left and went to a public school, and my bubble was burst, very much so. I think that's something that diaspora Jews don't get much of, is a reality check of the world doesn't revolve around us. We're very tight-knit communities, especially outside of Israel. We don't realize that we're insignificant in many levels. We are overachieving as a minority, but proportionately we're insignificant. And that moment when I went to a public college and realized I'm the only Jew here, no one understands or really cares about my story or our history or whatever. They already have their own preconceptions and their images of what a Jew is, of what Israel means. Zionism, for example, which is a word that's been demonized systematically for a long, long time. And I think, like a lot of people, the hatred that I've felt, all the ignorance that I've felt from people towards us, pushed me closer towards my identity and drove me to learn more about my history, essentially, and just to stand up for my people, and made me prouder of who I was every day, that I felt that I was that one Jew representing all Jews in a public college.
I think that's happened in a very intense way since October 7th here for many Israelis. Suddenly they were like, oh wow, this is sort of, I don't know if I want to say black against white or good against evil, but we have to know who we are and what we're fighting for.
And I think a lot of diaspora Jews have experienced that feeling, which I just mentioned, on college campuses since October the 7th. Even if there is a Jewish community there, they all of a sudden feel very small and very backed up against the wall. And for me, the only response to that in my mind is to learn how to fight. And that doesn't necessarily mean physically, although that's a really important part of what I do and what I promote. You have to be able to fight with fact. So I just started to educate myself, really. I just felt like I could never be in a position where I didn't have an answer, because as a Jew, whether you like it or not, you're a bit of an ambassador for the Jewish people outside of Israel. And like you just mentioned, the Israelis, I think before October the 7th, in fact, they didn't have much or any understanding of what Jews outside of Israel go through. And I think now they've almost got now Israelis have
visceral.
Yeah, exactly. And not just that, it's all they see. They don't see the good things about living outside of Israel. All they see is the media. So all they see is the college campuses and things like that.
I flew to the States this summer, and I have a friend who lives here in the neighborhood, and she was warning me. She also sits around and watches the news all day, but she was warning me that I have to be so careful because I had a long layover, and London, and that's actually why I started training with her husband, who's a karate master, so for self-defense. And then, of course, when I was there, I was like, I forgot about the whole self-defense thing. So yes, it was definitely different then, but she was in a panic for me.
Well, yeah, there's been Israelis in London who've been attacked for speaking Hebrew in the streets. It's really worrying, the future of Europe and outside of Israel, not just for Jews, but for Christians and Europeans and people who don't conform to Islam. But honestly, going back to the physical and self-defense thing, I don't think I'd ever have spoken out or have got to where I'm at now without having trained self-defense. So it gives you a subconscious confidence to speak your mind, which I think is super important if we want to stand up for ourselves. It's something that on a larger scale, Israel's been forced to understand from day one.
Yeah, I mean, people in the army, otherwise, most of us can't really defend ourselves too well. But I mean, many more people have arms than before October 7th.
Yeah, we rely less on fists in this country.
But it's the same thing. A phrase I like to use a lot is peace through strength. Today, as we were mentioning, I was talking about it briefly before the podcast. People like to employ which I view as fake virtues like diversity, inclusion, and all these political topics that people like to obsess over, when really the main thing is, and I think the reason a lot of people like to obsess over these political topics is because they feel weak within themselves and they need something to attach to. And the biggest realization in Israel has, unfortunately, we almost needed October the 7th to wake up as a people. And we're far from where we need to be, but
still a slow wake up.
Yeah, it's definitely a slow wake up. But I was speaking to, just to jump around a bit, I was speaking to a geopolitical correspondent not too long after October the 7th, and he said something really, which gets the mind going, and it was really difficult to get your mind around. So he said October the 7th wasn't an intelligence failure, because we had the intelligence. He said it was a failure of imagination, which immediately makes you think, what do you mean by that? If you can get your mind in the pre-October the 7th mind frame and think, what was the biggest tragedy or terrorist attack, the scale of it, what could we imagine? And it's maybe 50, 100, 150 people, a horrible event at one location. Even with the intelligence that we had, which was vast, honestly. And I don't like thinking about it, quite frankly, but because it was ignored. There was solid intelligence, and it could have been stomped out.
It also gives rise to conspiracy theories that are very
absolutely it does, and I don't think we can write them off, honestly, and that makes me a bit sick to say, but I don't think we can write them off. But the failure of imagination of what we're up against, even though we have known from day one and before the establishment of the modern state of Israel, we are always surrounded by people that want to kill us. And it's almost, basically makes up every fabric of their being to some degree. Some people just live with something in the back of their mind, Yahood this, the Jews are that, but don't really act on it. But these people we live next door to in Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the Muslim Brotherhood, it is every fabric of their life and their existence, from primary school education, preschool education, primary school is an English term, that's their culture. It's a big part of their culture. So the failure of imagination is not to be understated. And I think
suddenly you had these images of gore that, of course, I avoided watching, but you had these images that made it so visceral and so real, just how much, because the last sort of event of violence was about 2 years ago with also missiles from Gaza, and, then there was the outbreaks in Ramla and some violence and police and things like that, but it was not like this. So I think I was even sort of primed that, the next thing that happens will be in that same vein, but this was people going in and mutilating Jews. That requires real hatred. It's not anything political. It's very visceral.
It requires dehumanization. You can't do that. First of all, I've seen dehumanization on our side, and people would label me as quite right wing, but the so-called far right wing in this country are often guilty of dehumanization of the other side, and this is something that people talk about on the opposite side from the Arab Muslim perspective. They have an excuse for this. It didn't start on October the 7th, blah blah blah, all these things that they say. When we get in the mindset of thinking, how could a human do this to another human? They are, whether we like it or not, they're human. The Nazis were human. We have to look at what's going on in Europe right now, and we have to look at how quickly we can easily say that these guys are animals, and say that within ourselves. Because in Nazi Germany, or in the Germany in the 30s, it would even after Hitler was voted in, it was a minority of people who wanted to see the Jews dealt with in a certain way. The majority were silent, and the majority didn't take a minute to step back and think, where's this going? Which is something we have the luxury to do politically in Israel, despite what a lot of people might think. Whereas in the West, I think it's much more difficult to have open discourse about topics such as Israel and the conflict here, because views have been, Zionism has been dehumanized over a very long process, and it's not specific to our conflict. It's that inability to have discourse between people who may or may not disagree in the West has been diminishing steadily for a long time. And I think that's what makes it even more terrifying to be on campus for people, especially if you don't know how to defend yourself. Because the first thing these people do is scream in your face if you disagree with them. And it's worrying, because it's, like I said, it's been a long process of dehumanization and it starts with the word Zionism. The word Zionism Zionism is racism, something that's invented by the Soviets with the help of Qatar and their allies. And it's been pumped into Western education for a long, long time, to the point where you can now study courses on it in America. And
right.
It's in elementary schools over there that it's part of the curriculum at this point.
What, that Zionism is discrimination?
Essentially, yeah, just giving a false narrative of the history that led to the point where we are now, and then all the violent outbursts. Just everything is skewed the way they teach it.
Well, they use an American lens. This is actually, I'm quoting virtually the geopolitical correspondent I mentioned earlier. He said that they use an Americanized lens. He said something like that to implant or to overlay our conflict and oversimplify it. So they say the Jews are the white oppressors, and the Palestinians are the black or the brown oppressed. Big versus small. Mm-hmm. And it's once you take that American lens, because obviously the biggest problem with discrimination in American history is black versus white. Once you take that lens and overlay it over the Israel conflict, it makes it super easy to oversimplify and to be dishonest and pretend you're coming from a place of virtue. And I think that's how these radical leftists get away with screaming over anyone who may or may not disagree with them.
I think it really started with a sort of enlightened view that every side has two almost equal or equivalent legitimate sides. Every conflict has two legitimate sides. So once you start from that premise that, they're legitimate, if we're legitimate, well, they're just as legitimate, then of course it gives way to eventually maybe shifting even more preference for their side, because.
And that comes from the idea of, individual truths rather than a truth, which is something that's plaguing the world right now, I think, or at least the Western world. I don't think the Arab world has much of a problem with that.
They're
Although I think the perception there is changing. More people in the Arab world are being exposed to our narrative, you could say, our perspective of this what's actually been happening, and people are seeing past Al Jazeera. At least that's what I'm feeling from the things that I'm seeing on social media, which is nice. Like I feel more connected to Turks and Alawites, and I'm like talking to people that I never thought I would, Iranians, and just people who are really, really supportive, and that's been a nice shift.
Do you think in general in Germany, perhaps because not just in Germany, in Europe in general, that the Europeans, I don't want to say the original Europeans, but the Europeans are perhaps experiencing the backlash of very liberal immigration policies in terms of the Muslim communities and acts of terrorism. Do you think that maybe the trajectory might be that the world will start waking up about this, looking more cynically at this sort of woke, everybody's equal?
Well, first of all, I wanted to address what you said about there being the possibility for there being an equally valid possibility on the other side, or perspective on the other side. And I think that's what we've lost in Western society. Many people have lost, especially on these campus environments, the ability to leave your mind open a crack to the possibility that there is a equally valid opposition. And to answer what your last question on the liberal ideologies that have infested Western society to the point where we're now facing what is nothing short of population replacement. And that's not a conspiracy theory. All you need to do is look at it statistically. In England, for example, the Muslim every Muslim woman on average is having 3.1 children per Muslim woman in the UK, and for British women it's 1.5, and to sustain a population it needs to be 2.1 per woman. So the British population will even without any immigrants is dying out, and that's seen across Western society and in societies where career and other things are prioritized over family. And all you need to do is look at that without the wider perspective to see that there is a huge and very dangerous shift going on in Western society. But it's been the values and the oversimplification and demonization of the other side, which has been a really slow process, that has led to this point. I like to look at politics from left and right. It's almost an oversimplification, but I like to look at the left as thinking with their heart, and the right as thinking with their head. But you can't do both on a small scale, and you can't do both on a large scale. Like if I was to enter a relationship and have a difficult conversation with my partner, I can't just use my head or just use my heart. Or someone's going to get hurt. You're doing just both. You have to use both. And that goes the same for politics. So in my mind, I think the right wing to some degree should be in power for the majority of the time, but there can't be a reality where there is no left wing, there's no heart, pulling them back in the central direction and putting them in place when they act without empathy, which the right wing has been known to do. But when you have left-wing ideology at the forefront for so long, which is as a result of immense comfort in society. See, we don't need these strong morals and values which the right usually present, because we've had so much comfort for so long, which is something else I touch on all the time. Comfort is the killer. So once you have so much comfort, you start focusing on essentially fake problems. You start manufacturing problems. This is where anxiety comes from. If you don't put yourself through adversity, or you don't have any difficulty in your life, your brain chemistry is going to most likely fabricate some very real seeming problems. Most people don't have to worry about food, or most people who are peddling these ideologies at university campuses and in politics, middle class, they don't have to worry about their next meal or whether their house is heated, etc. So they obsess over these virtues, and in my opinion, they're fake virtues. We've taken what were real issues in society, and I say were, and I do largely believe that they are issues of the past, such as racism, and like the majority of the issue is in the past, in my opinion. Racism, sexism, homophobia. So we've gone from the point, we like to take things too far in the right direction, I describe. So acceptance and understanding of the gay community, great. And we achieved that 20 years ago, probably to this point. Feminism, women having the equal opportunity to reach the same job or same education, great. And we reached that probably at least 20 years ago.
When it's become possible to be different in any way and still be accepted, then you have to start creating new differences. Oh, I'm not just gay. I like men, but I identify as a woman. I want to dress like this, or I feel like a dog. I'm a dog.
Like, for the feminism thing, not just women should have equal opportunity, but now in this engineering company, we should be hiring 50% women and 50% men, regardless of qualification. It's just got all of these ideas have gone far too far in the right direction, to the point where they've just gone off a cliff. And it goes back to people not having any real problems to obsess over.
When you don't have something to bump up against, you find the internal things.
And I also do. It's largely to not to go off on another tangent. It's largely to do with the absence of religion in society. The main thing that people ask, well, what is the purpose of life? And arguably, that's the reason religion exists in the first place, is because people had these questions thousands of years ago. And we had no answers, we had no science, and we had no understanding of the world we lived in. And now we're going back to the point where we've now got a scientific understanding of the world to some degree, that people for a long time have been dismissing religion, and that we're left with this massive gaping hole in our being, which is purpose. And that I know what gives me my purpose. And if you've seen my content or what I do, I also, when I lived in the UK, I was teaching self-defense to the Jewish community, and I know what gives me purpose, and I know when I feel without purpose, I struggle to get up in the morning.
I think October 7th gave a lot of us purpose and sudden motivation, and if the people who felt directionless suddenly had it. To go back to your content, I've seen stories, reels, where you urge the European Jewry to return to Israel, that it's not a place for them anymore, which is an interesting thought. But at the same time, personally, I feel like we need representatives in the diaspora to fight the fight, to make sure that it's not all one narrative that's being pushed.
And that there's something to resist the Islam.
I do largely agree with that. That's probably the most common response I get to saying, I think we need to leave Europe. I do personally think that the time has passed for having, or the need to have, representation in Europe. For example, that the European courts agreed to try and arrest Bibi and Gallant. No arrests for any Chinese, Russian, Qatari, Saudi, nothing. Yemen, you could go on and on. The list goes on and on of countries committing horrendous human rights violations and war crimes. But no, it's just the Israeli leadership, after experiencing the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, the European human rights courts decide to go on a manhunt. I think we're so far past the point where representation is useful. I think we're at the point, especially in the UK, people see all the terrorist attacks going on in France, Germany, Austria, and Sweden, and they think that the situation is worse there. I think the situation could be equally as bad or worse in the UK and Ireland even as well, because it's so ingrained politically, and less so in these other European countries, to the point where I just don't see a way back. I don't see a way back. Like I said, even you just look at it from a population perspective, Europe, the UK, Ireland are still importing immigrants to this day. And there's no shift. There's no grand awakening of the silent majority of Western society. There is no shift that's going on. But what there is very strong unity on the side of the Islamists. That's the only side I can see that are actually banding together. There's no unity within the actual European societies.
I wonder, did Hamas plan that many steps ahead? I mean, when they committed this massacre, I mean, in the beginning, we all were like, well, finally, the world will see. And I did actually have sympathy for the first few days from, a friend of mine that I always think of in New York, who I feel I've been kind of estranged from since, he's got his political ire against Israel has grown, and so for the first few days after October 7th, he reached out, and I felt, oh well, the world will see. I mean, and then a month later, 2 months later, things
2
have
days
shifted.
later.
2 days later, things have shifted so dramatically. Is that what Hamas was planning?
Absolutely.
I mean,
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
It's just crazy that you can commit such atrocities and expect this to play in your benefit.
But it just goes back to the dehumanization. It's a slow process. We've heard Zionism is racism since the 80s, and it's been pushed into our education systems to the point where now, I think for a long time now, Qatar are the number one investor in US universities. Our biggest ally, the number one investor, are the people that housed the leader of Hamas just after they committed this atrocity. So it's been a very slow and patient process. And I mean, you can go back to Amin al-Husseini, the first leader of the Muslims in British Palestine before the State of Israel. He went and lived with the SS in Nazi Germany, and then went to Iraq and started the Farhud. So this is the very fabric of the Palestinian identity. The very fabric of that identity is disconnecting the Jews and the Jewish history from this land, creating this racist, colonial, buzzword, insert buzzword here, problem. And it's been to answer your question, they absolutely planned this. I remember I wasn't really doing content, but I was speaking out in a different way. Ramadan 2022 and 2021, the same thing happened. Maybe even 2023 as well. But the same thing happened at Al-Aqsa compound. I don't know if you remember, but it was big in the UK because the BBC are the mouthpieces of Hamas, and we realise that now, but we didn't realise it then. We were shocked and horrified at the way they reported of what happened, but we didn't realise the extent of, like I said, how ingrained Islamism is in UK politics.
When they were throwing things over the Western Wall.
Exactly. So every day at Al-Aqsa compound and the mosque there, I think it's almost 100,000 Muslims pray every single day at that spot. And that's the holiest site in Judaism as well. So the Israeli police actually facilitate that. So the Israeli police facilitate 100,000 Muslims praying every single day in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, on Ramadan. What happened was roughly, I think it was 100, 200 terrorists were storing projectiles like flashbangs and fireworks and massive rocks inside Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. I don't remember which one it actually was because they're in the same compound but different buildings. So of course, and if you don't know about the geography there, Al-Aqsa Mosque is up on the Temple Mount, which is the foundations of the Second Temple, or both the Jewish temples. And then the Western Wall, the Kotel, the holiest site in Judaism, is just below. One of the Western Wall is one of the sides of the foundations of the Jewish temple.
To be technical, it's actually inside on the Temple Mount, probably where the dome is. That's the holiest site.
There's no coincidence there, but we'll get onto that maybe.
So iconic. Crazy.
Jerusalem
We're on the lower outer wall.
Jerusalem is mentioned 0 times in the Quran, but that's another conversation. So, of course, the Israeli police have to respond. They're threatening to throw enormous boulders and fireworks and flashbangs down on the Jews praying at the Kotel. Whether they were planning on doing that or not, that's exactly the image they needed to portray to the Israeli police, because they know that Israeli police have to respond. It's almost exactly how Hamas were thinking on October the 7th. We take 250 hostages, we know, and then we hide behind our own civilians. We know how they have to respond. We know how anyone would respond if their family was taken in that way. So you have this situation on Ramadan 2021 and 2022, where the Israeli police, with their stormtrooper outfits, with the visors and the black police outfits and the grenade launchers, they look like stormtroopers. And they have to enter the mosque. They're throwing their own flashbangs and they're detaining about 100 or 200 of these terrorists. And that's it. The story is done. You don't even need to read the headline for me to tell you what the headline, for you to know what the headline is going to be. And the BBC reports it as Israeli troops storm Jerusalem mosque on Ramadan. That's it. That is the dehumanization. That is the Zionism is racism, cemented in every single liberal, even not liberal, people who get their 30-second, their news from 30-second clips and headlines, which is the vast majority of society, at least my generation. That's it. That's their mind made up. And that happened 2 years in a row. And I was doing security for the Jewish community back in London at the time. And immediately we felt a big uptick in attacks, whether they were verbal or physical, a big uptick in attacks after that very moment. So the BBC, one of the world's most renowned and trusted, or once trusted, news publications, is a mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood. So to go back to you saying your point on Western society and how we need representation as Jews in Europe, and how this ideology has been allowed to fester and get to the point where we're at now, I think it's nothing short of genius attack on education and weaponization of the liberal so-called thinking with your heart phenomenon, because it's become what true leftism is the empathetic politics, thinking of people who are less fortunate than you. You could be an upper class person and still be leftist through your policies. But that weaponization of that over decades, largely due to comfort and complacency in Western society and immense funding from Qatar, Russia, etc., China, has got to the point where it's no longer thinking with your heart, it's weaponization of the heart. So I'm sure everyone's heard the phrase of pulling on your heartstrings. All you need to show me is a photo of a dead child in Syria, caption it Gaza, show me and just say, how could you not support my cause? I'm showing you a dead baby. Doesn't that make me in the right? That's it. That's all. It's weaponization of the heart. And that's where we've got to with Western politics.
It's really part of a generation growing up without feeling real war. You know, if you've...
2 generations.
2 generations, whereas for the vast majority of human history, war was... Everybody knew what war... For the most part, I mean, times of peace were anomalous, not times of war.
Absolutely.
So, you know, if you have no experience of war, then all it takes is seeing a dead baby to say, well, my mind is made up.
Yeah, like you just said, the vast majority of human history has been brutal conflict, colonization, bloodshed, and just there's hardly been a moment of peace around the world. And I mean, we look around us now, and there isn't really. We just have the illusion of peace in Western society. And I think you see these immense levels of complacency in places like England specifically and the UK, because we were never occupied by the Nazis. We had the food rations after World War II, and we experienced heavy bombing, but we were never occupied or invaded by land, which is a big difference. We didn't have to experience that. And I think that's allowed us to have this creep into our politics to a much greater extent, to the point where I think our defense secretary, David Lammy, said that we should be going for a 2-state solution. Just recently he said this. You're either so out of touch with reality, or you maybe both. You're so out of touch with reality and just so wrapped up in the Palestinian identity, and out of touch with reality, and just so wrapped up in the weaponization of the heart.
This really connects to what you were saying before, about peace out of strength. You know, it's become sort of taboo, I think, to be considered strong, to be the strong one. It's not something that's
it's a right-wing thing to go to the gym.
That's a trip.
We joke, but honestly,
is it really? Yeah, it's the jocks. You know.
It's mad, and we were talking about this before the podcast as well. I used to buy into you got all these political topics which are framed to be virtuous, framed to be in the good for the good of society, such as, for example, censorship on social media, or climate change, or veganism, or whatever it is.
Anti-bullyism, as Dad would.
And it's, where do these ideologies come from? For example, the biggest contributor of humans is China to climate change. Yet they're the biggest funders of the ideology in the West, and they manufacture most of the parts of the electric cars, and they manufacture the hydro and the wind turbines, and it's just we've become so obsessed with the fake virtues that we are unable to look outside of our own societies and just think, where is it actually coming from? And that doesn't just go for the climate change and people being told to go vegan for the climate, when really they just want our testosterone to be at rock bottom. Because testosterone is a right-wing thing too, by the way.
Unless you're a lesbian. A trans.
Well, yeah, they got plenty of testosterone.
They get it free and they push it on.
Everything I just mentioned there to Islamism, we've stopped being able to listen to our enemies. Islam and Islamism, and just all you need to do is read the Quran and listen to these imams speaking at the masjid to hear what they say about us. But we've become unable to do that, almost similarly to the way we're unable to have a constructive discourse with someone who may or may not disagree with us politically, even if it's within our own family around the dinner table. And we've become unable to do that, and we've also become unable to listen to our enemies, because in a way, well, not in a way, it disagrees with our learnt virtues.
So if the vast majority of diaspora Jews did end up coming to Israel, what would that look like for the Jewish community? Would it be safer for Jews abroad? Would it end up being a war between a massive real world war?
I don't think, to start with, just because I believe that the Jews should come to Israel, I don't think they will.
Yeah.
Something that is repeatedly told to me when people hear that that's my view is that 20% of the Jews left Mitzrayim. Only 20% of the Jews, which were slaves, left Egypt.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I think that's pretty telling. The devil you know. And it just tells you a lot about... We're learning a lot about the nature of human beings over the last couple of years, since COVID and everything that's going on now. We're learning a lot about the feeble and fickle nature of human beings, and how easily clouded our judgment can be. So I don't think I don't think even half of the Jews will move, but I'm trying to get as many as possible. We were talking about the need for representation in Europe. I don't believe that is any longer the case, because these political ideologies have taken it to this point where we were already vastly outnumbered, but now it's so ingrained in society and in the education system. I don't think you can find an educational institution which isn't at least somewhat against Israel, Zionism, or Jews, or all three. And that tells you everything. And there was a study in the UK it was between 18 to 24-year-olds. I think it was 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds believe Israel should not exist. And that number got less and less, the older the demographic that they surveyed. And that just tells you, whether it's this year, next year, 5 or 10 years, we're going to have a serious, serious problem. We already have a serious, serious problem.
It's really quite remarkable if you look at Times newspapers from the 70s, from the Yom Kippur War, and of course from the 6-Day War. I mean, they loved us. We were heroes. We were rock stars. And that was from a place of strength, not because they were saying, oh, the poor Jews, we should feel bad for them. They were like, wow.
Because we were holding our own and we were strong. Back then it was...
Conquering.
It was still cool. Not necessarily we gave Egypt land back in the interest of peace, but we were surrounded, we still are, surrounded by people who desperately want to kill us, and we held our own. And that is something that Americans and people with traditional Western values, or anyone really, if you're outnumbered and the underdog wins, David versus Goliath, anyone would resonate with that. But I think people who really just hate their life, especially kids my age, really just, a lot of them just hate their life, don't have any real issues, as we've just mentioned. They don't resonate with that. They don't resonate with someone who's disproportionately successful, because it makes them feel worse about themselves. I think there's a big part of that. A big part of my generation in the West has no purpose, as we talked about. Just can't find. They're very self-hating and anxious. We're just living in this society where everyone's judging each other. So you always just want to be part of the pack because that's where it's safest. And when you're part of the pack, is the easiest way to deal with something that disagrees with you is just to shout over it. So we're just at this point now where, as I said, I don't think there's much point in Jewish representation. America's a different topic because America still has a chance and people are armed to a good degree. But you look at Canada, Australia, Europe. I think you look at what happened in Amsterdam with the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, how the WhatsApp group of Uber drivers coordinated with the attackers and essentially told the attackers where Israelis were staying at which different hotels. And like a massive group chat of Uber drivers, like over 1,000 Uber drivers in Amsterdam. And the police took over for 30 minutes, despite it being a European football match. Police are there in large quantities. So it's institutional.
Do you feel the police are not really able to protect Jews? And
not that they're, I think to a large degree they're not able, and also to an equally large degree they're not willing. I think at the end of the day, the system is made up of the people. You can write the laws and rules and whatever, however you want, but they're enforced by people. The healthcare system is run by people. So when you see 2 Australian nurses bragging about killing Zionists and Israelis, and it taking weeks for them to be charged, which shows reluctancy.
What is this story?
You haven't heard?
You didn't hear about? I think it was Melbourne. There was was it Omegle, like that online live chat site where you just get a random person around the world to chat to. This guy joined a call with these 2 Australian nurses. I think they were Lebanese originally, and they were bragging. He said he was from Israel, and they were bragging, if I had a Zionist, I would kill them. No. They were bragging.
Zionist, Jew.
I think they said Israelis, not just Zionists. Yeah. For example, when I got attacked by Islamists in London about a month ago, and I was told that I reported it, and I was told I'd have because I don't live in London, so I couldn't go down to the station. I was told that I'd have a video call scheduled, and they never did. And it's taken 4 weeks, and I finally got an email from someone saying, we can't get hold of you. You got my email, you got my details. That, like I said, the system is made up of people, and when the vast majority of people are either indifferent or have an opinion the other direction towards Jews and Israelis, I think the time to have positive representation is long gone. I think the negatives outweigh the positives for staying in Europe. And I think we can bring an immense amount of wealth to our home here. And just to segue from that onto why I made Aliyah in November of 2024, so very recently still. Not because I'm scared, but more because even before speaking a word of Hebrew, I came here and I felt like I was surrounded by family. And how we met is a really good example, honestly. You just meet people so naturally and so authentically here as a Jewish person. People are just happy to see you here. In the UK, especially London, people will do everything they can not to see you, not to talk to you. You wear a Star of David on the train, you better be ready to have some very scary stare downs at the very least. It's just, I couldn't think of anywhere we should be other than Israel. We belong here. Every fabric of our being belongs here. And I think it's a real shame that there are people, especially within it, including my own family. I've had this argument around the Seder table at Pesach. Passover, that we view ourselves as British Jews instead of Jews living in Britain. We've been in exile for so long from our ethnic and ancestral homeland. This place is connected to our blood. It's inseparable, that we think we're British Jews rather than Jews living in England. And that might be understandable to some degree if there was some British blood in my family. Zero. We are third generation immigrants to the UK.
It also gives a lot more legitimacy to the Arabs that say we don't belong here. What's our connection really? That's what they say. Thousands of years you haven't been here. It says you're not from here.
Well, that's not the truth.
Here.
Even that's not the truth.
Even that's not the truth. There's been
steady Jewish inhabitants of Israel for that entire time.
Entire Jewish cities, and they just don't talk about it.
Have you heard that there's very, very good evidence, historical and archaeological and genetic and everything, that most of the Palestinians are also from
absolutely.
The tribes of Israel?
I mean, Islam is over 1,500 years younger than Judaism. Only a certain amount of the population that now exists here of Arabs are colonizers. There were Greeks here. There were the original Philistines here, and only I think some of the Canaanites became Israelites and Jews. So it's a whole mess and mix here. So
I'm not sure the Philistines still exist, at least biblically wiped out, gone completely 700 years before Jesus.
Well, they were a Greek descendant as well, and there's lots of Greek DNA here, and in Egypt as well.
I mean, I'm sure there was also some.
It's all an absolute mess. So that makes it even a bigger tragedy, is that they are literally our cousins. They are. There is no escaping that.
It's so surreal to see videos of people in Gaza in the West Bank just chanting for our death, and they look exactly like our family.
Yeah,
exactly like us. I could place any of them in my family. They wouldn't. Nobody would have any questions. And that's part of the history of forced conversion, of abuse, of rape that has occurred here for 1,400 years at this point, almost, and not just here, but like all of the MENA region. You end up with people who hate each other, then they have the same DNA, and they've all been colonized by Arabs, and they somehow have been. They had that mind shift over all that period of time to become so Islamized that they also see us as the race that has to be wiped out or converted.
Well, a big thing with the Islam and Islamism is that a land that was once controlled by Islam and then is lost subsequently is the most haram. So Andalusia in South Spain was once part of this Islamic conquest and a colony, and they lost it.
Actually, all of Spain, almost all the way to the border with France.
So Islamists are often heard saying, "Inshallah, one day we'll reconquer Andalusia." Think of a worse example than that is the Jews having their own country, and not just having their own country, in the middle of the Middle East, which they so strongly claim to be theirs, only through successful colonization, other than where we're sat right now.
Well, I think right now we're kind of experiencing the beginnings of the rest of, at least this part of the Middle East, people waking up to the fact that they have a culture that's not Arab, that predates Arabs, and are I don't know, distinguishing. I'm sure it's happening and has been happening that I just haven't been aware of. I mean, right now I'm learning about Syria, things that I never knew before, and the cultural rifts that exist within. But it feels like people are pushing back more because of that awakening, and I think it has to do with people, speaking up on YouTube. Can give a shout out to a lot of Israeli influencers right now, but I think they're speaking directly to those communities and explaining to them the history that has been erased by the Arab conquerors, and hopefully that keeps going.
I think we can view Israel as either really unfortunately geographically located or very fortunately geographically located. I mean, virtually every successful colonizing force has passed through this point. For good reason. It's perfect for trade. It's literally at the center of the world. And within this tiny strip of land, you have arid desert, the Dead Sea. You have access to 3 different seas, the Suez Canal and well, not anymore, but immense green, lush wildlife in the north, which is just unheard of from any land, especially to the scale that Israel is on.
Yeah, Mansour said if we lay down this, if we gave up on this war, we could become the world superpower in terms of our resources, and the Arabs too. It could be. It's this area, this region is generally looked upon as kind of barren. I don't know, wasteland. Maybe I think
because
nowadays
our neighbours have been focused on the wrong things. They've not been focused on self-betterment, and I think that's what you get when you have these ideologies which are just so tyrannical. And I think that's why, just to go back to Western society and all these ideologies and what's going on there, I think looking at Iran and how they became an Islamic republic, there was a very odd and very similar alliance of the radical Islam and the radical left back then, as there is now in the Western societies. But right now we're experiencing colonization, which is, I don't think, ever been seen before, in that it's voluntary. We are inviting these people in. We are paying, I say we, Europe and the West, we are paying, our taxpayers' money is going towards housing them and feeding them. Many of them are not working, and they're outbreeding us. So it's going to get to the point where Western society is no longer Western society. And that's because of this very strange alliance between two ideologies, which have very little in common other than they hate the West, and they both end in tyranny. The leftist ideology, like I said, it's like a weaponization of the heart. We're censoring on social media because we want to protect you from hate speech, when really we just want to close the circle of what people can say and can't say, and how much you can disagree with the government narrative, and just increase tyranny slowly, until there's no wiggle room. And that's basically what an Islamic society does, which is why everyone surrounding us is completely barren. And the top 1% of those societies are living in multi-billionaires, and everyone else just lives on scraps. And that's what it looks like in the vast majority of Islamic societies, if not all of them. I mean, you have Abu Dhabi and the UAE, but that was not only built on largely slave labor, but it was built for global oligarchy. That's basically one of the only examples of a prosperous society which is governed by Muslims, but I think it's over 70% expats. So there's no, I think this is where the crossover Islam and the leftist socialist movements, not the ideologies, but the movements, they cross over because they both want to get rid of free speech, and they both want to get rid of and diminish these levels of freedoms, which leads to that eventuality in society.
I want to maybe like to sort of wrap things up, get a little bit of your impressions on Israelis. I mean, there's so many cultural differences. I felt it strongly, even having grown up intimately knowing Israel still when I moved here. I mean, there's so many cultural differences. And also, you know, if you've had any experience with the Arab Israelis here, and that's a whole other topic, but, you know, so how do we approach them here? I'm just curious.
I really resonate with the culture here. I mean, about the only thing I still am struggling with is that people don't wait to get on the train or the bus, and it's just a bit of a push. But if that's all, then I think I can cope. But my parents are so British and so polite, and like when the cashier is not even looking at you when they're scanning your items, they scan your items, they say the number. They don't even like you said, what's up, hi. They don't look at you. They're scanning the items. They just say the number, and that's it. And that's it's tough to get over when you're used to such a polite society, and but I think the culture here is very special because I think it's come about and it's become what it is now as a result of, unfortunately, trauma, but also as a result of the fact that we've had to be this startup nation. We have to be so, yalla, let's get things going, let's raise off the ground immediately. And that you see that in tiny little corners of society and in individuals, and it can be intense, but it's good fun.
Yeah.
And I think we have our priorities in line to the highest level. I really do. We have family, fun, health, and just all the right things right at the top. Whereas you look at Western society and you've got career, mortgage, this and that. Like, these things exist here, of course they do, but there's, I don't know who said this, but I keep using it, and I'm going to continue using it. This phrase. In England, people live to work. In Israel, people work to live. Even if you're working these crazy high-tech jobs and people work in the towers of Tel Aviv, they're still working to live their life. They're not living to work. And that was one of the main things which just killed a massive part of me whilst living in London. So I really resonate with the culture here. To answer your question on the Israeli Arabs, I think they contribute massively to society, and I think many of them really, really would just love to be wholly accepted. I think, sadly, I don't think they ever will be, to the same degree as another Jew would be within the Jewish state, which is sad, but I think we can do a lot on an individual level to make them feel that they are one of us, because they are one of us. You've got this whole invented story about the Nakba, but we've got over 2 million Arabs in Israel, which makes up 24% of the population. So the people who didn't leave whilst Israel was being attacked on all sides were given Israeli passports. So they are welcome. I think largely, again, due to trauma, some unfortunately significant part of the population would make them maybe feel that they're not so welcome.
Yeah, very
but
much.
I think a lot of them really just want to contribute to society, and I think we have the Druze are a good example of people that aren't Jewish within this land that just want to live in peace and have their priorities of life in order. And I think without these divisive ideologies like Islam or leftism, whatever you want to say, you can keep your priorities in that line and work towards that one shared, should be simple goal, which is living in peace.
Have you heard any Jewish Israelis say you can't trust them? You can't trust.
Absolutely.
I'm very tormented by that, because on one hand, at my most basic level, I believe that most of them would have the sort of suburban ideal of they want to live, they want to be able to support themselves and their family and live and have a decent house, and so I always think that, given the option of war or, a comfortable life, most will opt for a comfortable life, but there are also many that say you can't trust them, and maybe they're right. I don't know.
We weren't here during the first Intifada, or at least for most of it. I think maybe we visited at some point during it, but yeah, people who lived through that have a deep trauma. I mean, it was neighbors and friends that were carrying out horrific attacks. So, when you've known somebody for 30 years and then they come and in the middle of the night slaughter an entire family, children in beds and everything, it becomes very difficult to trust. And I know that not everybody is like that, but how do you know who is and who isn't?
In a way, how can you blame them? The people who have experienced that immense level of trauma.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult one, and I think obviously both sides need to be doing more. I always say this: why then, if you don't know who Yosef Haddad is, he's a Israeli Arab from Haifa who's very well spoken and outspoken on social media. He's got a big platform, Yosef Haddad. I always think, why aren't there 50 Yosef Haddads on a full-time salary? Yeah. Because there's definitely 50, maybe 5,000 Israeli Arabs who could and would do that job.
There are a few that are doing it. There's also what's his name? The young Druze guy. That's
we have Mansour as well, who we both met. But
there's also a young guy. It's like
Loai,
the Yemeni.
The reason we don't have 50 of these Israeli Arabs doing hasbara is largely because we as Jews don't agree on much within ourselves. The old adage is 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think, and that's something I've been trying to work with some other activists, you could say, to try and find funding to create more structured behind, because our PR is terrible. Everyone knows our PR is terrible, but we're fighting a losing battle even if our PR was good. So that is something that always frustrates me. So everyone could definitely be doing more, but it's difficult to it's difficult to see how there could be any other eventuality after so much trauma. And there's trauma, the immense trauma on both sides. How there could be a future of coexistence. I mean, we're living it now in Israel. We're living it in Jerusalem. Is a wonderful example. It's just a soup of different people, and it's just incredible. But I mean, you look at Gaza and the people in Gaza, and you look at the levels, seemingly equal levels of indoctrination in the West Bank. It's difficult to see a future where we can actually live side by side with most of these people, which is why I totally understand why they're labeled as radicals, but there are Jews that say we can't trust these people, because I mean, it goes back to the discussion with European immigration. If 5 out of every 5,000 is going to commit a terrorist attack, you stop all 5,000, right?
Yeah.
That's the lot. That you think of your own family first, and I think that's, like I mentioned earlier, right at the start of the podcast, I said that October the 7th was unfortunately something that we needed to wake up as a people. We need to stop apologizing for defending ourselves. We need to stop formulating excuses and thinking of the world's image before we act in our own best interests. I think we need to make sure we are truly acting in our own best interests, obviously with like I said, the leftist influence, so that we're making sure that we are being moral always, because that's what the Jewish people are about. But
I also think that would help Arab Israelis who are on the fence have an easier time just sort of pitting their faiths with us if we were more confident of our right to be here, and that we are, like Mansour says, we're not just good enough, we're awesome.
Yeah.
If that were the attitude, it might actually be easier
We've never been just good enough, though, as Jews, have we? That's never been...
That's kind of our approach now. Like, we're good enough to be here. Like, leave us alone, and look what we're going through.
The leave us alone mentality is a weak leftist mentality. And we're not immune to the weak leftism in this country. When we were most focused on it, October the 7th happened. Which is why we need to go back to, I like to think of everything in my life as, how do we evolve to be? So I like to do the cold water, and I like to stand in the sun in the mornings, and we've got to go back to basics as individuals and really focus on ourselves being strong as individuals, and we will very quickly realize that our morals will follow in the right direction. And I think that's where most of Western society and liberal society has gone wrong, is that we don't have real problems. We don't put ourselves voluntarily through adversity. So when real adversity comes, we've got no idea how to deal with it. And I think on the largest scale possible, Israel has been forced to understand this. We forgot it briefly, and we saw what happened when we do. We have absolutely no luxury for complacency or comfort, although we've got a lovely, amazing illusion of comfort despite the occasional siren. Even that we found fairly easy to ignore despite the sleep pattern interruptions. we walked to in Tel Aviv at least, we walk into the shelters nonchalant. It's like we can't continue to go back to this cycle of complacency and comfort. We have to always be, which is why I think the conscription is such an amazing thing. You see the difference between 18, 20, 22-year-olds here and outside of Israel. Massive difference. Western 22-year-olds still don't really know their left and rights. But honestly, before October the 7th, I was a leader on a birthright trip, and you get Israelis during their service join you on the trip. And then I led the same trip a year later. So it was August 23, August 24. And the difference between the Israelis on these trips was night and day. The first group, they were arrogant, they were self-centered, and they had no idea and no real ability to understand what Jews outside of Israel went through or go through. And after October the 7th, each individual was a leader in themselves. They were compassionate, desperate to understand more about what Jews outside of Israel go through, and just surrounded, because they're surrounded by heroes. Overnight, their friends, family, cousins, whatever it is, they know someone who's died. Well, I think it was 1 in 10,000 people died in Israel on October the 7th. So everyone knows someone who picked up a gun and went to the front lines, or someone that was harmed. So we were forced to jump up, and I'm so glad that my generation did in this country, because there's no way that's going to happen in Europe.
Well, there are several European countries talking about reinstating conscription, especially considering with the situation with Russia.
I think that's just disgraceful, quite frankly, because the reason I think that's disgraceful, for example, in the UK is spending, I think it's over £10 billion a year on housing migrants, feeding migrants, migrant boats, whatever it is. They spent 500 million on this Rwanda project to try and, the last government, to try and deport migrants to Rwanda. They didn't deport a single migrant, and it was blocked by the European courts. So we're housing migrants in hotels and historical sites, like actual 100-year-old houses, and they want to talk about conscription. They want to talk about the British people going to fight for the government who's not fighting for them, who's raising taxes, and it's just impossible. It's an impossible reality to imagine, quite frankly. Because I know if I lived there, there's no chance in hell I would fight for a government who does the opposite of fighting for me as a British person. They are, and it's difficult to see it otherwise if you know even a little bit about what's going on in Europe and the West. They are acting against us. The governments in Europe and the Democrats, which thankfully just were booted out of office in the US, they were acting against us. And the talks of conscription are scary. But in a previous reality where we didn't have governments acting against us, absolutely is a necessity. We like I said, we have this immense comfort and complacency. But if 0 to 18 is in the lead up to you doing military service, where you're going to be carved into a formidable being, you have no option to be, or very little wiggle room to be a weakling. Mm-hmm. So that's why you see it here. You see real human beings here.
Even before the army, like you said, even in the lead up, it changes your awareness. As a mom, it's certainly, I don't know. It's not really a time I want to think about, when my kid becomes 18. I accept it as being sort of on a grand level, something that is real and true to human nature that perhaps we should go through, and not just be like, my kid is awesome and he can have a great future. Why should I endanger him? What is this country? Is this country really worth it anyway? Or does the government really have my best interests in mind? It's easy to kind of come up with excuses. But I wanted to ask if you've considered enlisting.
That's my plan.
Yeah.
I always wanted to. I'm very combat oriented.
So something in my mind, and maybe it's a motherly thing, thinks, wow, this is such a good Jewish boy. He's so smart. He has so much to contribute. So talented. Like, really? Is it really worth it to put your life in danger for?
I always wanted to do special forces. But I've got a fracture in a vertebrae in my spine. So that's well and truly ruled that out. But not for the worst. I think my life has taken me in a very funny direction. And before October the 7th, I was teaching Krav Maga and doing security for my community in England. And I wanted to come here when I was 18 and enlist to a combat role when I was 18. Now at 24, I made Aliyah at 24.
And like my story.
And I really still want to enlist. And my plan is to join Dovel Tzahal, to become an army spokesperson. And like I said, our PR is terrible. I think a British accent could do some good. and a bit
Little
less,
BBC
a
up in
little
there.
bit less liberalism, a little bit less liberalism, and apologetic mindset. A little bit more our own best interests in mind, without being devoid of morality.
Maybe bringing some good Israeli Arab Zionists to talk.
Absolutely.
What you mentioned before, I also think it's a tragedy that, I don't know, it almost seems like bemechuvan, like a deliberate. Why are we not using, these populations that love Israel and speak some sense? Why are we not giving them better positions? And even Bedouins that, were traditionally very loyal to Israel, and that might be changing in the last generations, but really they were like this with us. Why are we not giving them more of a platform? I don't know.
Yeah,
But that's
it's funny.
Room for improvement.
But yeah, I think, I mean, it's going to break my heart to wear the green uniform without a gun. But I think I can do so much from that role. Whereas, especially considering what I've been doing since the war, I've essentially been preparing myself for that role, whether I like it or not, really. And I think I could just have a huge impact doing that. And I definitely don't want to get to 28 and never having served. My Hebrew's at a good level, but I want to be able to really become an Israeli. And that's my plan.
So inspiring.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan. We need somebody good to speak on our behalf.
Yeah, really. May God bless you and give you success. Yeah.
Amen.
One community which I've had a lot of outreach to is the Black Christian community. And I think there's been a massive stake driven in between the Jewish and the Black communities. And there is no education about the connection between, for example, Martin Luther King and the original funders of the NAACP, being his closest allies were rabbis. And people are probably the largest community outside of the Jews messaging me or commenting on my post is either Hispanic Christians or Black Christians. And the Black Christians, especially in England, are very silent when it comes to talking out about it, largely due to the fact that they're often very friendly with Arabs. The ethnic minority, in inverted commas, because we don't count as an ethnic minority, the Jews. Too white, far too white. So.
Well, I saw a video where someone lays out how white people are actually a minority.
Oh yeah. In all the biggest cities in England.
In the world.
It's coming. That'll soon be the next campaign.
I mean, I'm talking a little more globally, where it's like 8 to 10% we're not exactly a we in this, but white people are like 8 to 10% of the global population. And people have like an outside view of us.
The white male is the next oppressed minority.
But it's a real tragedy that there's been this stake driven between the Black community and the Jewish community, and that's all come from the Zionism is racism mentality. But really, the Jewish community and the Black community, and the gay community, but the Jewish and the Black community have so much in common, because for something that they can't change about themselves, the Jews, Blacks, and the gays, they're discriminated against for. And they have to band together to find a sense of community and to fight back in a certain way and to uplift one another. And that's just become so divided since this Zionism is racism ideology in the 80s.
Also, Judaism is kind of a tricky one because you can convert, you can assimilate. You don't have to be Jewish.
And that's it. That's another thing which comes with this Zionism is racism. Even within the Jewish community, there's been this disconnect. Thank you. There's been this disconnect between Judaism and being Jewish. I'm not a religious guy. I'd say I'm traditional. I'd like to start keeping Shabbat once I finally settle here. Like I said, people in England, Jews in England see themselves as British Jews, when really we're ethnically Jewish living in England. And the religious part can come as part of that, but it doesn't really come into the equation. We are Jews. Black people can't forget that because it's visible. Mm-hmm. They can see it. Everyone else can see it. Within us, all we need to do is take our kippah off and stop thinking about the fact that we're Jewish, and we can stop being Jewish, kind of, until, not kind of, but not really.
Until
Not
somebody
really.
reminds us.
Exactly.
Someone reminds
We'll
us.
always be Jewish. Everyone else knows that we're Jewish, even though they can't see it.
They'll find out somehow.
They know that everyone else seems to know there's a difference, but a lot of us don't seem to know that there's a difference, and that we are Jews before we're anything else.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big reason why the disconnect between the black community and the Jewish community has become so strong or so stark. And that's been just, again, decades of educational indoctrination, and that Jews are the white people from Europe, and the Arabs in the Levant are the oppressed minority. And as George Orwell says, if you control the past, you control the future. So you just got to change these narratives with these oversimplified false truths, and it's super easy to create these disconnects. But you ask me, people who aren't Jewish, what have been their views of what I'm doing. Arabs, largely negative. I've had some people from Syria, even a couple from Iran. There's quite a big Iranian community in the UK that joins the Jewish community in their fight against Islamism and hatred towards Jews in Israel, because they understand better than anyone else what that comes to,
Right.
where Western society is headed. But honestly, the reception of what I'm doing from a large proportion of the community that aren't Jewish in the UK has been pretty positive. But the Arab community, there's very little, if none at all, that are openly, at least, somewhat pro-peace or pro-assimilation or coexistence.
I can understand if everything that they understand about the Middle East conflict is what they're getting in their propaganda, then, why would you? My husband has often said, if I was growing up in Gaza and watching what they see on the TV, I would do the same thing. So.
Not just what they see on TV, but they taught it from day one.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no escaping it.
Yeah.
It's almost more difficult to understand how someone could escape it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
How could you get to a point after growing up in Gaza?
How could you get to any other point than the Jews are the demon?
That's why we're so impressed whenever anybody does.
Like with the
Hassan Muslim Abuse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
What a man.
He's amazing.
it's amazing.
So I kind of understand the conspiracy theories as to people thinking he's Israeli, but
Yeah, right.
It's almost too much to believe. But when you do get these rare people that have a strong moral compass and have this rare ability to take us even within these circles of hatred and gripping ideology, are able to take a step back and just think, whoa, I'm being taught that killing this group of people is the only answer. Could that be wrong? And unfortunately, I mean, there's probably much. I mean, we've seen it with interviews with even there's a few hijabi women in Gaza who've been videoed by Israeli media screaming at the top of their voices against Hamas.
Not just women, men.
Yeah.
They're disappeared. These people are killed, and the media doesn't speak about it. They don't mention. Remember this guy?
Yeah.
He's now dead. Hamas killed him.
It's but that's something that the socialists, the radical left, and the Islamists share. Censorship of the people that don't agree with you, and it's actually so interesting. The Democrat Party sent hundreds of millions to Google and Meta and Twitter before it was X, to censor on things that went against government narrative. And if you even today, if you Google define a fascist, the first 3 words include far right. And I don't know personally, maybe I'm uneducated, I don't know of any far right fascists. Even the Nazis were the party for the people. The Nazis were the Workers' Party. They were actually the National Socialist Party. And they continue calling themselves that throughout the war. They were the National Socialist Party. The biggest tyrants and the biggest fascists, because the defining element of being a fascist is censoring and silencing those who disagree with you. And that is almost exclusively seen on the left. Exclusively.
The whole idea of politically correct came out of Soviet Russia.
That's it. That's it. So when you see people like Elon Musk going into his own pocket to essentially save freedom of speech, I personally don't believe we would have Trump now if Elon Musk didn't buy Twitter. I mean, he sacked 85% of the population. And I think it was Trump that said, I've never seen a fascist shrink government. The government only gets bigger the closer you get to fascism. There's no such thing as was it? I think it was Ronald Reagan that said once, the scariest sentence ever is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." He said it while he was president, and it's true. We don't need it. Humans don't need or want this big brother approach to government. The government is in a way, it's necessary for the government to lie to us. Necessary, because if we knew everything, if we knew a comet was headed towards Earth and is going to kill half the population, you think it would be good for society to know? So that's a hyper example. But it's the same way it's the parents' job to lie to their kids, it's the government's job to lie to society to a certain degree. So that obviously comes with immense responsibility. So when you have these people who are just interested in censoring things that disagree with the government narrative, it's only a slippery slope. There's almost no stopping it unless you get people like Elon Musk, not to paint him as a hero, but honestly, I think it was an act of heroism buying Twitter.
I see him as Batman with a stutter.
With a little bit of autism, but you know what? A little bit of autism is the best.
I think Batman had a little bit of autism.
Absolutely. But you know what? A little bit of autism gives you the ability to view things from a slightly different angle, a slightly different perspective to everyone else. So I'm grateful for. I've got a diagnosis for autism and ADHD, and
well, I probably would get one too. And then if I went to.
But it helped me so much because I was diagnosed with both by the age of 12, and I had the ability. I had the luck of having two amazing parents who supported me through that. But I had the ability from an early age to understand things that I didn't naturally understand so well.
Yeah, you don't think because they say that sometimes the labels actually, depress a person and stick them in a.
I think if there's no ability, if there's no resources or ability or environment to comfortably understand what you struggle with, and often in Western society there isn't, because, for example, people on the spectrum are shoehorned into it's like the square peg round hole. It's like you have to sit down for 8 hours a day and study, or you're disruptive or unintelligent. And I rarely was able to do that. I don't think that makes me. I mean, it definitely made me disruptive. I don't think it made me unintelligent. It just made me uninterested. So, I mean, we've got massive problems within Western society where we're not. God, this is a big segue, but where we're not assimilating people who should be some of the biggest contributors to our society. We're shoehorning everyone into the same role until they're 16, 18, and then we're basically telling everyone that they need to go to university. And it's become very broken within Western society, where university doesn't actually teach you anything, it just indoctrinates you, puts you into debt.
I think the modern world is a little more closely resembling Aldous Huxley's Brave New World than it does 1984. I mean, certainly there's elements of the 1984 Big Brother, but have you read Brave New World? So it's a society where you have like very distinct caste systems. So you have the workers who are bred to be completely stupid, not think on their own, and then you have the general population who have soma, which is a drug to like placate them and not make them think about everything else. It's kind of like a Ritalin. I see it as kind of like a Ritalin type of situation where you're not so, where you can just kind of exist in the world without needing something else. And that's what they're doing to all the kids, that can't sit in class. 1 in 4 boys in America are medicated for ADHD. They're putting on Ritalin as a kid too. So I was on something similar,
and they're actually they're families of amphetamines. They're part of the same family as meth, and we're putting our kids on them. And it made me a different person. It made me anxious. To some degree, it made me able to focus. But
I remember there was a kid here. There was a time I was doing English lessons on the farm to small groups of kids, very small, very unstable. But there was a kid that his mom used to bring him regularly every week from Ramat Gan. She loved it. He loved it, and he was just all over the place, kind of wild. I would often have to rein him in. Just really enjoyed being here. And then he started taking Ritalin sometime near the end. And one of the last lessons, it ended up being just him and my kids. But I planned this whole thing. We made ice cream with sheep's milk from the sheep and the ice cream maker. And he was like into making the ice cream, but he didn't want to taste it, even though it was really good. And then he just wanted to go home. And his mom was like, well, guess he wants to go home. Usually he would stay a few hours, guess, all right, okay, bye. It's just like, that's it, It's
so when
turned off.
when you're on the spectrum in that way, ADHD, people think that people with ADHD are unable to focus. People with ADHD are actually uniquely and especially able to focus on things that interest them, but it's difficult to find those things for long enough. So that's why the square peg round hole thing and the medication is just so terrible, because we're trying to put people or put kids in positions where it's a total utter waste of time. You've got these people who are uniquely able to focus on other things, or their special interests, which is what it's called, being on the spectrum. And you have these hyper focuses. They're uniquely able to focus on those things, but you're making them study maths or you're making them study history, and they're not remotely interested in those topics. So, I mean, it's been this way for a long time, but the education system in the West absolutely needs to be reformed to raise functional adults, I think. And you mentioned that the label is often seen as something that brings people down rather than raises them up. And I think that's also, again, largely to do with the fact that there's this gross misunderstanding of what it actually
it
means.
is seen as a diagnosis. It's seen as an aberration.
So
and
being
a problem.
ADHD is seen as someone who can't focus, not someone who's uniquely able to focus on the special things that they are interested in. It's essentially there's a scientific definition. It means you have a lower base level of dopamine. And if you've got a lower base level of dopamine, it takes more to stimulate you. So you just got to find those things, and it doesn't make sense to continue the way we're educating our children in the West.
I wonder if phones and social media are what's the word I'm looking for?
Contributing to.
Yeah, contributing to.
Absolutely, they're not just contributing. They're not just contributing. They're manufacturing ADHD in kids who aren't born with ADHD. That it's being manufactured. Kids who get iPads from the age of 2, they're now molded into their hands. It's actually not possible to take them away from them. It's really worrying. I mean, with everything else we've discussed about the younger generation.
It's really scary. It's really hard to avoid, though, also. I mean, as a parent, it's
Absolutely.
so hard to really limit it.
I used to, a part of me hated my parents when I was a kid because they used to make me set a timer before using the Xbox. But you know what? If I wasn't forced into doing that, I don't know where I'd be or what I'd be like. Because you see kids who get the free reign of that, and they just become dysfunctional adults.
Yeah.
It's a year of my life to Diablo 2 and 5.
But you know what? That's not unique.
Yeah, my kids are always complaining, all my friends are allowed to watch as much as they want. I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but even if a few of their friends are allowed to watch as much as they want, really?
Yeah.
So that's probably just what they do all day,
That's the problem. It's also the easy way out for parents. It's such
for me also.
It's like free babysitting.
Yeah.
But it's proven to literally change brain chemistry, and we're manufacturing ADHD for kids, and it's bad. But to go back to Israel, we're very far away from being immune to this problem. I think we actually have a generation of adults, not just kids, who are grossly addicted to their phones it's different. We're addicted to our phones from a trauma response. I think.
Yeah, you think?
I mean, anyone who's Jewish and remembers October the 7th, if you didn't run to combat, you were stuck to your phone. And I think we've been somewhat stuck to our phone ever since. We've all got these news updating telegrams and WhatsApp groups, instant news. So in a way, it's different to the wider world. The reason why we're always on our phones, but we very much have a similar issue here.
Yeah, my husband for the first half of the time since the war was watching the news all the time, and then finally he enlisted. Now he doesn't watch anything. He asks me if I've heard sometimes if I've heard any news, what's going on. I'm like, God.
The Israelis love to have their TV on non-stop, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy because there's no such thing as good news. No one's going to report a cat being rescued from a tree, and it's. I mean, we have had good news recently. In the return of some of our hostages, but the vast majority of the time you're just getting fed with things what puts you down, really. It makes you think, it just makes you can't be thinking on such a grand scale all the time. It's because it's almost manufacturing anxiety for yourself, because anxiety is manufacturing problems that are out of your control. Or fabricated entirely. So when you're listening to the news and you're listening to these global reports or these massive problems which are out of your control, just putting yourself down and to no effect.
Feels like the only thing you can do is go into the comments section and try to talk some sense.
But that's the problem. That's a problem in itself, because that gives you a dopamine rush, right? ADHD and no ADHD, it doesn't matter. It gives you a dopamine rush to either have these arguments or you see a comment that you disagree with on someone, and you reply what you think is a fact, and it just becomes this. You could do it all day.
Oh, I was for a while.
And that's it.
Well, you met some good people through your internet.
Not through the comment section though.
Not through the comment section.
But, honestly, I was paralyzed on October the 7th to my phone, just stuck to the news, and I very quickly kind of came to I built this. I didn't consciously build this process, but I very quickly it just became part of me. When I'm angered by something, it's 5 seconds of anger translated into motivation. What can I do? Who can I tell? And how can I do it in the best way possible? And I've just naturally gone towards hasbara and influencing, just because of that. Because I've always felt like, ever since I left the Jewish bubble when I was 16, I felt like I'm an ambassador. I felt like I have a responsibility to be strong and to show other Jews that it's actually pretty easy to be strong, and that they should do it too. And yeah.
It's awesome. Yeshar koach. We wrap up?
Yeah, that was amazing.
Yeah, you're very impressive, and I just imagine one day we're gonna look back and we'll be like, oh, we interviewed him. And really, I think Bezrat Hashem. I think you're destined for big things.